The letter arrived 3 days after they buried him, and Katherine Dalton held it with trembling fingers while the California sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street outside the lawyer's office in San Pedro. Mr. Harrison Whitmore had owned the general store for 23 years, and she had worked beside him for the last 6 of those years, learning every corner of the business, managing the books when his hands grew too shaky, opening the store when he could not rise from bed, and she had believed with her whole heart that he saw her as more than just an employee. The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat uncomfortably as Katherine read the brief contents of the will, her eyes scanning the words once, then twice, then a third time because surely she had misunderstood. "I don't understand," she whispered, looking up from the paper. "He left the store to his nephew in Boston, but Mr. Whitmore had no family. He told me he had no one." The lawyer shifted in his chair. "Apparently he located a distant relative some months ago. The nephew, a Mr. Charles Whitmore, will be arriving within the month to take possession of the property and business." "And me?" Katherine asked, though she already knew the answer from the hollow feeling spreading through her chest. "What about my position?" "That will be up to the new owner, Miss Dalton. I'm afraid Mr. Whitmore made no provisions for you in his will beyond ensuring you receive your wages through the end of this month." He pulled out a small envelope. "He did leave you this letter, however." Katherine took it with numb fingers and walked out of the office into the blazing afternoon heat of San Pedro in July of 1883. The town sprawled along the California coast, a rough mixture of fishing industry, shipping trade, and the kind of hard men who made their living from the sea or the land. She had come here 6 years ago with her father, who had died within a year of their arrival from pneumonia, leaving her alone at 19 with nothing but her wits, and the job Mr. Whitmore had offered her out of kindness. She did not open the letter until she reached her small rented room above the milliner's shop, where she sat on the narrow bed and broke the wax seal with careful fingers. Mr. Whitmore's spidery handwriting filled half a page. "My dear Katherine," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have departed this world, and I hope I have gone peacefully. You have been like a daughter to me these past years, and I have cherished every moment of watching you grow into a capable, intelligent woman. I know you hoped I would leave you the store, and my heart breaks that I cannot. My conscience would not allow it. You are young, my dear, with your whole life ahead of you, and I could not bear to saddle you with the burden of a struggling business and the judgment that would come from this town for a young, unmarried woman owning property. They would make your life miserable. Find happiness, Katherine. Find love. Find the freedom I could never give you. With deepest affection and regret, Harrison Whitmore." Katherine read it twice more, then carefully folded it and placed it in her small wooden box of treasured items. She did not cry, though something hard and painful lodged in her throat. Mr. Whitmore had meant well, she knew that, but good intentions did not pay rent or buy food. Good intentions did not change the fact that she was now facing unemployment and poverty in a town where respectable positions for women were scarce and closely guarded. She had exactly $43 saved, her wages through the end of the month, and nowhere to go. For the next week, she continued working at the store, taking inventory and keeping the books, though the joy had drained from the work. The regular customers offered their condolences about Mr. Whitmore's passing, and she smiled and thanked them and did not mention that she would likely be gone soon herself. She inquired quietly about other positions, but the seamstress had no need for help. The hotel had a full staff, and the restaurant owner laughed outright when she suggested she might work in his kitchen. "No offense, Miss Dalton, but my customers expect their meals cooked by someone who knows what they're doing," he said, not unkindly. "You're a shop girl, not a cook." She was examining her dwindling options and considering the unthinkable idea of moving to Los Angeles to seek domestic work when the cowboy walked into the store on a Thursday afternoon. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who made his living from physical labor. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his dark trousers, and he wore a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face that was more interesting than handsome, all strong lines and sharp angles with startling blue-gray eyes that swept the store before landing on her. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the accent of somewhere farther south, maybe Texas or New Mexico. "I'm looking for some supplies. Tobacco, coffee, dried beef if you have it, and ammunition for a Winchester." "Of course," Katherine said, smoothing her skirts and moving to gather the items. "Just passing through town. Was planning to," he said, following her to the counter. "But I heard there might be work at the Stevenson Ranch up north of here. Thought I'd inquire before moving on." "They're always looking for good hands," Katherine said, measuring out the tobacco and wrapping it carefully. "Mr. Stevenson runs about 3,000 head of cattle. It's hard work but honest pay. That's the kind I prefer." He watched her work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow did not. "You run this place. I work here," she corrected quietly. "The owner passed recently. His nephew will be taking over." Something flickered in those blue-gray eyes. "And you?" "That remains to be seen." She tallied his purchases quickly and told him the amount. He paid with coins from a leather pouch, his hands rough and scarred from hard work but clean. "Cooper Sutton," he said suddenly, extending his hand. "Seemed rude not to introduce myself properly." "Katherine Dalton." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. "Welcome to San Pedro, Mr. Sutton." "Cooper," he corrected with a slight smile that softened the harsh lines of his face. "Mr. Sutton was my father, and he's been dead these 15 years." She found herself smiling back despite everything. "Then you should call me Katherine. That wouldn't be proper, seeing as we just met." He gathered his supplies. "But maybe after I've been in town a while if you're still here." "Maybe," she agreed, though she doubted it. He tipped his hat to her and left, and she watched through the window as he mounted a sturdy bay horse and rode north out of town. She thought about him periodically over the next few days, wondering if he had gotten the job at the Stevenson Ranch, wondering why she wondered at all when she had far more pressing concerns. The nephew arrived on a Tuesday morning, stepping off the stage with 2 large trunks and an air of self-importance that immediately set Katherine's teeth on edge. Charles Whitmore was perhaps 35, soft around the middle, with thinning blonde hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent their days indoors. He wore an expensive suit that was completely impractical for San Pedro's dusty streets, and looked at the town with barely concealed disdain. "You must be the shop girl my uncle mentioned in his letters," he said when Katherine introduced herself at the store. "Katherine, is it?" "Yes, sir. I've prepared all the inventory records and account books for your review. I'm sure they are adequate." He waved a dismissive hand. "I'll be making significant changes, of course. This place is hopelessly outdated. We'll need to modernize, bring in better quality goods, raise the prices to something more reasonable." Katherine bit her tongue. The store's prices were already as high as the local economy could bear, and most of their customers were working people who counted every penny. "The town has certain expectations regarding pricing," she said carefully. "Then their expectations will need to adjust." He looked around the store with a critical eye. "I'll also be hiring my own staff, people I can trust. I'm sure you understand." Katherine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're letting me go." "I'm sure someone of your capabilities will have no trouble finding another position," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll give you through the end of the week. That seems generous." It was Tuesday. The end of the week was 4 days away. "I see," Katherine said quietly. "Thank you for the notice." She worked the rest of the day in a daze, serving customers and organizing shelves while Charles Whitmore sat in the office and examined the books with little comprehension of what he was reading. When she finally left that evening, she walked aimlessly through town, her mind racing through possibilities and finding none that seemed viable. She could ask Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house about working for room and board, but the older woman had already told her she could barely afford to keep the place running as it was. She could write to her cousin in San Francisco, but they had never been close, and the thought of arriving as a charity case made her stomach turn. She could try to find work in one of the saloons, but that path led to expectations and compromises she was not willing to make. Lost in thought, she did not notice where her feet had taken her until she found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland and the ocean glittered in the distance. A rider was approaching from the north, and as he drew closer, she recognized Cooper Sutton on his bay horse. He reined in when he saw her, touching the brim of his hat. "Evening, Miss Dalton. You're a ways from the store." "I needed some air," she said, then surprised herself by adding, "The new owner arrived today. He's letting me go." Cooper dismounted in a fluid motion and stood beside her, his horse's reins loose in his hand. "When? End of the week." He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the horizon. "Did you get that job at the Stevenson Ranch?" Katherine asked, needing to fill the silence. "I did. Good outfit, decent pay. They're shipping a herd to the railhead in Los Angeles next month." He glanced at her. "You have somewhere to go?" "Not yet." She tried to smile. "But something will turn up. It always does." "That's a lie," he said bluntly, and she looked at him in surprise. "Begging your pardon, but I've seen enough of the world to know that things don't just turn up. You make them happen or you go without." "Then I'll make something happen," Katherine said with more confidence than she felt. Cooper was quiet again, then said, "The Stevenson place needs a bookkeeper. Mrs. Stevenson has been trying to manage the accounts, but she's got her hands full with the house and their 4 children. The pay would be room and board plus $15 a month." Katherine's heart leapt. "Are you serious?" "Wouldn't say it if I wasn't. I mentioned you to Mr. Stevenson this morning when I heard about your situation. He said if you were interested, you should come by tomorrow to discuss the position." "How did you know about my situation this morning?" "I only found out a few hours ago." A slight smile tugged at his mouth. "Small town. Word travels fast." "The postmaster's wife was in the store when the nephew told you, and she mentioned it to Mrs. Patterson, who mentioned it to the cook at the ranch when she delivered eggs this morning." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed that her misfortune was already public knowledge but grateful beyond words for the opportunity. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly, you didn't have to do that. I know." He swung back into the saddle. "Ranch is about 5 miles north of town, white house with green shutters. Can't miss it. Come by around 10 tomorrow if you're interested." "I will," Katherine promised. "Thank you, Cooper." He touched his hat brim again and rode off, leaving Katherine standing in the dusty road with the first real hope she had felt in weeks blooming warm in her chest. She went to the ranch the next morning, wearing her best dress and carrying her letters of reference from Mr. Whitmore and the school where she had briefly taught before coming to San Pedro. The Stevenson place was impressive, a sprawling ranch with neat corrals, well-maintained buildings, and the organized chaos of a successful operation. Mrs. Stevenson met her at the door, a handsome woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. "You must be Miss Dalton," she said warmly. "Please come in. Cooper spoke very highly of you. The interview lasted less than an hour." Mrs. Stevenson showed her the ranch's account books, which were indeed in a state of disarray, and seemed delighted when Katherine quickly identified several discrepancies and suggested better organizational systems. By the time Katherine left, she had been offered the position with the understanding that she would start the following Monday and live in a small cottage behind the main house that had previously been used by a foreman who had moved on. She gave her notice to Charles Whitmore that afternoon, enduring his pompous assertion that he had been planning to let her go anyway, and spent the next few days packing her meager belongings and saying goodbye to the few friends she had made in San Pedro. Mrs. Patterson cried and pressed a tin of cookies into her hands. The postmaster's wife gave her a warm shawl she had knitted. Even the restaurant owner who had dismissed her cooking skills wished her well and told her she was always welcome for a meal if she found herself back in town. Cooper appeared on Saturday morning with a wagon to help transport her things to the ranch. It took only one trip, which made Katherine acutely aware of how little she owned after 25 years of life. A trunk of clothes, a box of books, her mother's china tea set carefully wrapped in linens, and a few other small treasures. "That's everything?" Cooper asked, securing the last box in the wagon bed. "That's everything," Katherine confirmed, climbing onto the wagon seat beside him. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, the morning air cool and pleasant before the day's heat set in. The landscape around San Pedro was beautiful in its starkness, all golden hills and scattered oaks with the Pacific Ocean a blue shimmer to the west. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said finally. "Go ahead." "Why did you help me? You didn't know me. We had spoken for all of 5 minutes when you went to Mr. Stevenson on my behalf." Cooper was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "My mother died when I was 12, he said finally. "Fever took her sudden. My father had passed 3 years before that, so it was just me and my younger sister, Anna. We had nowhere to go, no family that wanted the burden of 2 more mouths to feed. A woman in our town, Mrs. Richardson, took us in even though she barely had enough for herself. She said nobody should be left alone in this world if there was any way to prevent it." He glanced at Katherine. "Anna's married now, living happy in Santa Fe with 3 children. I send her money when I can. And I remember what it's like to have the ground drop out from under you and no safety net to catch your fall." Katherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I'm sorry about your parents and grateful for Mrs. Richardson and for you. Don't mention it." But his voice was softer than usual, and when their eyes met briefly, Katherine felt something warm unfold in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. The cottage behind the main house was small but charming, with a tiny parlor, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and wardrobe, and a kitchen area with a wood stove. Someone had cleaned it recently, and there were fresh wildflowers in a jar on the small table. "Mrs. Stevenson wanted you to feel welcome," Cooper said, setting down her trunk. "She's good people." "It's perfect," Katherine said honestly. The cottage was more than perfect. It was hers, or near enough, and after years of rented rooms and temporary situations, the sense of having her own space, however small, was almost overwhelming. Cooper helped her unload the wagon, then tipped his hat. "I should get back to work. If you need anything, the bunkhouse is just past the barn. I'm usually there in the evenings." "Thank you, Cooper, for everything." "You already thanked me," he said, but he was smiling slightly as he left. Katherine spent the rest of the day settling in, unpacking her belongings and arranging them carefully in the cottage. By evening, she was exhausted but satisfied, and she fell asleep in her own bed for the first time in longer than she could remember, listening to the distant sounds of cattle and crickets and feeling, for the first time since Mr. Whitmore's death, that everything might actually be all right. She started work on Monday morning, and Mrs. Stevenson proved to be as kind and organized as their first meeting had suggested. The account books were indeed a mess, but Katherine had dealt with worse at the general store, and she threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. She created new ledgers, organized receipts, tracked expenses and income, and within 2 weeks had a clear picture of the ranch's financial situation that had Mr. Stevenson shaking his head in admiration. "Never seen it laid out so clear," he said, studying her neat columns of figures. "Wife's been telling me for months we needed help with this, but I kept putting it off. Should have listened to her sooner." "You have a very successful operation," Katherine told him. "The numbers show steady growth over the past 5 years." "That's good to hear from someone who knows what they're looking at." He smiled at her. "You're working out just fine, Miss Dalton. My wife speaks very highly of you." Katherine settled into a routine over the following weeks. She worked in the ranch office each morning, breaking for lunch with the Stevenson family, then returned to the books in the afternoon. She took her dinners in her cottage, cooking simple meals on the small stove and reading by lamplight until sleep claimed her. It was a quiet life, but peaceful, and she found herself content in a way she had not been in years. She saw Cooper frequently, though rarely for long. He would tip his hat when their paths crossed, exchange a few words about the weather or the work, and move on. She learned that he was well respected among the other ranch hands, that he had a way with difficult horses, and that he sometimes played harmonica in the evenings when the men gathered outside the bunkhouse to smoke and talk. One evening in early September, as Katherine was returning from the main house after a late meeting with Mr. Stevenson about purchasing new breeding stock, she heard the sound of music drifting from the direction of the bunkhouse. She followed the sound and found half a dozen men sitting on benches and overturned crates, while Cooper played a slow, melancholy tune on a battered harmonica. She stood in the shadows, not wanting to intrude, and listened as he transitioned from one song to another. The music was beautiful, haunting in its simplicity, and she was so caught up in it that she did not notice when he finished and the men began to disperse until Cooper spoke from just beside her. "You can come out of the shadows, Miss Dalton. You're not trespassing." Katherine stepped into the lamplight feeling foolish. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. The music was beautiful." "My father taught me," Cooper said, turning the harmonica over in his hands. "He said a man should have some beauty in his life, even if he makes his living from hard work and dirt." "That's lovely." Katherine paused, then added, "You don't have to call me Miss Dalton when we're not in company. We've known each other nearly 2 months now." "Katherine, then," he said, and something about the way he said her name made her pulse quicken. "Would you like to take a walk? It's a pleasant evening." She should have said no. She should have made her excuses and returned to her cottage like a proper unmarried woman. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'd like that." They walked away from the ranch buildings, following a path that led up a gentle rise to a spot overlooking the property. The moon was nearly full, bathing everything in silver light, and the air was cool and scented with sage. "How are you settling in?" Cooper asked. "Very well. Mrs. Stevenson has been wonderful and the work is engaging. I feel useful here." "You are useful. Mr. Stevenson says you've already saved them money by catching billing errors and renegotiating supplier contracts." Katherine felt a flush of pleasure at the praise. "I enjoy the challenge. What about you? "How long do you plan to stay at the ranch?" "Haven't decided yet," Cooper said, leaning against a fence post and looking out at the moonlit landscape. "I've been moving around since I was 18, working ranches from Texas to Oregon. Never stayed anywhere longer than a year or two." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Got used to leaving before I could be left," he said finally. "Easier that way." Katherine understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. "It's lonely, though, always moving." "It is," he agreed, his eyes finding hers in the moonlight, "getting more so as I get older." They stood in comfortable silence, and Katherine was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth radiating from his body and the way the moonlight caught in his eyes. She should move away, put proper distance between them, but she could not seem to make herself do it. "I should get back," she said finally, though she did not move. "Probably," Cooper agreed, not moving either. They stood there a moment longer, something unspoken hanging between them, and then Katherine forced herself to step back and start down the path toward her cottage. Cooper walked beside her in silence, and when they reached her door, he tipped his hat and bid her good night without trying to follow her inside or press for anything more. Katherine lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about the cowboy with sad eyes who played haunting music on a battered harmonica, and understood what it meant to be left behind. September gave way to October, and the ranch prepared for the cattle drive to Los Angeles. It would take nearly a week to move the herd to the railhead, and Mr. Stevenson needed 8 men for the drive. Cooper would be going, of course, along with most of the other experienced hands. The night before they were set to leave, Katherine was working late in the office, finishing the payroll calculations so the men could be paid before departure. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the door open until Cooper spoke. "Mrs. Stevenson said I'd find you here." Katherine looked up, startled. "Is something wrong?" "No. I just wanted to say goodbye before we leave tomorrow, in case I don't see you at breakfast." "Oh," Katherine set down her pen, suddenly feeling foolish for the disappointment that washed through her. Of course he was just saying goodbye. What had she expected? "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, likely. Week to get the herd there, few days to get them loaded and complete the sale, then the ride back. He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was thinking when I get back maybe we could take another walk, if you'd like." Katherine's heart skipped. "I'd like that very much." Something in his expression softened. "Good, that's good." He started to leave, then turned back. "Katherine?" "Yes, be careful while we're gone. I know the ranch seems safe, but there's been talk of trouble down in Los Angeles. Labor disputes, tensions between the railroad and the workers. Probably nothing, but I'd feel better if I knew you were being cautious." "I'll be careful," she promised, touched by his concern. He nodded and left, and Katherine sat for a long time staring at the ledger without seeing the numbers, her mind full of blue-gray eyes and the promise of walks in the moonlight. The ranch felt strangely empty with most of the hands gone on the drive. Katherine threw herself into her work, organizing 5 years' worth of old receipts and creating a comprehensive filing system that had Mrs. Stevenson praising her efficiency. The days passed slowly, and Katherine found herself watching the northern road more often than she cared to admit, looking for signs of the returning riders. They came back on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks and 1 day after they had left. Katherine was in the office when she heard the commotion of their arrival, and she forced herself to remain at her desk, rather than running out like an overexcited schoolgirl. But when Cooper appeared in the office doorway an hour later, freshly washed and changed, her heart leapt in a way that could not be denied. "Welcome back," she said, hoping her voice sounded calmer than she felt. "How was the drive?" "Long and dusty, but successful. Got a good price for the herd." He leaned against the doorframe, looking tired but pleased. "I've been thinking about that walk for 2 weeks." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. "I have too," she admitted. They walked that evening, following the same path up to the overlook, and this time when they stood looking at the sunset-painted sky, Cooper took her hand. His palm was rough and warm against hers, and Katherine felt something slot into place inside her, like a puzzle piece she had not known was missing. "I need to tell you something," Cooper said, his voice low and serious. "I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last 14 years moving from place to place with nothing to show for it but a good horse and a few $100s saved. I'm not rich, I'm not educated like you are, and I have no prospects beyond the work of my hands. But I think I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that before this goes any further." Katherine's breath caught in her chest. She should be sensible. She should protect her heart, remember what had happened with Mr. Whitmore and the false hope of security. But when she looked at Cooper, at the raw honesty in his eyes and the way he held himself as if bracing for rejection, she knew she was already too far gone to turn back. "I'm 25 years old," she said quietly, "and I have even less than you do. A few boxes of belongings and a job that could end tomorrow if the Stevensons decided they didn't need me anymore. I've been left behind more times than I can count, and I've learned to rely only on myself because everyone else eventually leaves. But I'm falling in love with you too, and that terrifies me more than anything else ever has." Cooper's hand tightened on hers. "I won't leave you," he said fiercely. "That's a promise, Katherine. I've spent my whole life running, but I'm done. I'm ready to stay if you'll let me." "I want to believe that," Katherine whispered. "I want to so badly." "Then believe it." He raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "I know I said I'd never stay anywhere longer than a year or two, but that was before I met you. Everything's different now." Katherine leaned into his touch, letting herself hope for the first time in years. "Kiss me," she said, and he did. It was gentle at first, his lips soft against hers, but it deepened quickly into something hungry and desperate, two lonely people reaching for connection and warmth. Katherine's hands clutched at his shoulders, and his arms came around her waist, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the sun had dipped below the horizon and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "We should probably go back," Katherine said, though she made no move to pull away from his embrace. "Probably," Cooper agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But let's stay here just a little longer." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the stars came out, and Katherine felt something she had not felt since before her father died. The sense that she was not alone, that someone saw her and valued her, and would stand beside her no matter what came. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened into something real and solid. They were careful to be discreet around the ranch, not wanting to be the subject of gossip, but they spent their evenings together walking, talking, and learning each other's histories and dreams. Cooper told her about his childhood in New Mexico, about his sister Anna, and the letters they exchanged every few months. Katherine told him about her father, about the loneliness of the years after his death, and about the bitter disappointment of Mr. Whitmore's will. "He meant well," Cooper said one evening as they sat on the porch of Katherine's cottage, watching the sunset. "But good intentions don't pay the bills." "That's exactly what I thought," Katherine said, leaning against his shoulder. "I was so angry at first. Not just about the store, but about the letter. He said he was setting me free, but it felt like he was abandoning me." "You have every right to be angry." Cooper's arm tightened around her. "He should have prepared you at least, given you time to find another position." "I suppose everything worked out for the best," Katherine said thoughtfully. If he had left me the store, I would never have come here. I would never have met you." "Then I'm grateful he didn't," Cooper said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Selfish of me, maybe, but true." November arrived with cooler weather and preparations for the holidays. Mrs. Stevenson was planning a large Thanksgiving dinner and had invited several neighboring families to join them. On the afternoon before Thanksgiving, Katherine was helping in the kitchen when Mrs. Stevenson said casually, "You should invite Cooper to join us tomorrow. He shouldn't have to eat in the bunkhouse on a holiday." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't want to presume." Mrs. Stevenson smiled knowingly. "My dear, everyone on this ranch knows you and Cooper have been walking out together for the past 2 months. You're not fooling anyone, and for what it's worth, my husband and I approve. Cooper is a good man, and you've been good for him. He's been smiling more lately." "You don't think it's inappropriate?" Katherine asked. "Given that we both work here, I think 2 people finding happiness in this hard world is never inappropriate." Mrs. Stevenson patted her hand. "Invite him. I insist." So Katherine invited Cooper to Thanksgiving dinner, and he accepted with a look of surprised pleasure that made her heart squeeze. He showed up at the main house the next afternoon wearing his best shirt and trousers, his hair still damp from washing, and sat beside Katherine at the crowded table while Mrs. Stevenson served roasted turkey, potatoes, vegetables from the garden, and 3 kinds of pie. It was the best Thanksgiving Katherine could remember, full of laughter and good food and the warm feeling of belonging. After the meal, as the adults sat digesting and the children ran wild in the yard, Cooper took her hand under the table and squeezed gently. Katherine squeezed back, feeling absurdly happy and grateful and hopeful for the future in a way she had not allowed herself to feel in years. That evening, as they walked back to her cottage in the darkness, Cooper said, "I've been saving money." "That's wise," Katherine said. "I have about $400 now. I was thinking if I keep working hard and save what I can, in 6 months or so I might have enough to start looking at a piece of land. Nothing fancy, just a small homestead. Maybe run a few head of cattle, some horses." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know I'm serious about building something, about staying." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm making $15 a month," she said. "It's not much, but I have almost $100 saved. If we combined our savings, we could start looking sooner." Cooper stared at her. "Katherine, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I want a future with you," Katherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm saying I'm tired of being alone and uncertain, and I'm ready to build something real with someone who won't leave." "You'll never be left again," Cooper said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "I swear it on everything I hold sacred. You'll never be left again." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Katherine clung to him and let herself believe in the promise of those words. They were married in early December at the small church in San Pedro, with the Stevensons and a handful of ranch hands in attendance. Katherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Stevenson had helped her sew, and Cooper wore his best suit with a new white shirt. They spoke their vows before the minister with steady voices, and when Cooper kissed his bride, the small congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Mr. Stevenson had given them 3 days off for a honeymoon, and they spent it in Katherine's cottage, now their cottage, learning each other in ways both physical and emotional. Katherine had been nervous about the intimacy of marriage, but Cooper was patient and gentle, and by the second night she had relaxed into the joy of sharing a bed with someone who loved her. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered one night, lying in his arms while rain pattered on the roof. "I thought I'd end up alone, working until I was too old to be useful anymore." "You have it now," Cooper murmured against her hair. "We both do, and we're going to build something good together, Katherine. I promise you that." They returned to work with new energy and purpose, both of them saving every penny they could spare. Katherine continued managing the ranch accounts, and Cooper took every opportunity for extra work, breaking horses and repairing equipment during his free time. Mr. Stevenson, pleased with their dedication, gave them both small raises and promised to write letters of reference when they were ready to start their own place. In February, Cooper heard about 160 acres available for homesteading about 15 miles northeast of the ranch, in the foothills where the land was rougher but had good water and grazing. They rode out one Sunday to look at it, and found a beautiful valley with a year-round creek, stands of oak trees, and endless potential. "It's perfect," Katherine breathed, standing in the middle of what could be their land and turning in a slow circle. "Can you imagine a house there by those trees? And a barn near the creek?" "I can," Cooper said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I can see all of it. It's going to take years of hard work to build it up, though. You sure you're ready for that?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Katherine said firmly. They filed the homesteading claim in March of 1884 and spent the next 5 months preparing to move while continuing to work at the Stevenson Ranch. They needed to stay long enough to save more money and to build a basic cabin on their land before winter set in. Cooper worked on the cabin during his days off, and Katherine helped when she could, both of them driven by the vision of their future home. By August, they had a small but sturdy cabin with one large room, a fireplace, and a loft for sleeping. It was not much, but it was theirs, and when they finally moved their belongings from the cottage to the homestead, Katherine felt like she was moving into a palace. The Stevensons threw them a farewell party, and Mrs. Stevenson cried as she hugged Katherine goodbye. "You'll come visit," she insisted. "Promise me you'll come visit." "Of course we will," Katherine promised, crying herself. "You've been so good to us, we'll never forget it." They started their new life as homesteaders with little more than hope and determination, but it was enough. Cooper built a small barn and corrals, and they bought 6 head of cattle and 2 horses with their savings. Katherine planted a garden and learned to cook on the fireplace, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch of their tiny cabin and watch the sun set over their land. It was hard work, harder than anything Katherine had ever done. Her hands, which had been soft from years of bookkeeping, became calloused from hauling water and tending the garden. Her back ached from bending over laundry and carrying buckets, but she had never been happier. Cooper worked from sunrise to sunset, building fences, tending the cattle, and making improvements to the property. Some evenings he was so exhausted he could barely eat before falling into bed, but he never complained. They were building something together, and every fence post driven into the ground, every seed planted in the garden, was an investment in their shared future. In October, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Cooper one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through several emotions in quick succession before settling on pure joy. "A baby," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We're going to have a baby in the spring," Katherine confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back with concern. "You shouldn't be working so hard, not in your condition." "I'm pregnant, not sick," Katherine said firmly, "and we have too much work to do for me to sit idle. I'll be careful, I promise." Cooper was unconvinced but knew his wife well enough not to argue. Instead, he redoubled his efforts to make life easier for her, hiring a local boy to help with the heavy work and insisting that Katherine rest more often. Katherine tolerated his hovering with good humor, touched by his concern even when it became excessive. The winter of 1884 into 1885 was mild, for which they were both grateful. Their little cabin stayed warm with the fireplace, and their supplies held out well. Katherine spent the long winter evenings sewing baby clothes, while Cooper whittled a cradle from oak wood, and they talked about names and possibilities, and the future they were building for their child. Their son was born on a rainy April morning, delivered by a midwife from San Pedro, with Cooper pacing anxiously outside the cabin. When the midwife finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy boy, Cooper rushed inside to find Katherine exhausted but radiant, holding their tiny son against her chest. "His name is James," Katherine said softly. "After your father." Cooper sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes wet with tears. "James Sutton," he said, touching one tiny fist with a gentle finger. "Welcome to the world, son." Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Katherine fell in love with him more deeply every day. Cooper proved to be a natural father, patient and tender with his son, and Katherine often found him in the middle of the night, standing by the cradle and watching James sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never thought I'd have this," he told her one night, echoing her words from their wedding night. "A home, a family, a place that's mine. I spent so many years just existing, never letting myself hope for more, and now I have everything." "We have everything," Katherine corrected, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "And we're going to make sure James knows how wanted and loved he is." Life on the homestead settled into a demanding but satisfying rhythm. The cattle herd grew slowly but steadily, and Cooper's reputation as a skilled horseman brought requests from neighboring ranches to break difficult animals. Katherine managed the household and cared for James while also keeping meticulous financial records and negotiating the sale of their cattle each year. When James was 2 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous about telling Cooper, and his joy was just as intense as it had been the first time. Their daughter was born in the winter of 1887, and they named her Anna Katherine, after Cooper's sister and her mother. Anna was a beautiful baby with dark hair, and her father's blue-gray eyes, and James, at 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister. Katherine often found him standing by her cradle, talking to her in his garbled toddler speech and trying to share his toys. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. The homestead thrived under their care, expanding to 200 acres when a neighbor sold out and moved east. They built a larger house to replace the cramped cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children and a real kitchen for Katherine. Cooper built a proper barn and a bunkhouse, as they now employed 2 full-time hands to help manage the growing operation. They made regular visits to the Stevenson Ranch, where the children played with the Stevenson grandchildren, and the adults caught up on news and gossip. Mrs. Stevenson always wept with joy at seeing Katherine, telling everyone who would listen that she had known from the beginning that Katherine and Cooper were meant to be together. In 1889, when James was 4 and Anna was 2, Katherine found herself pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. Cooper hired a girl from town to help with the housework and the children, and he hovered even more anxiously than he had with James. Their second son was born in early 1890, a robust baby they named Robert after Katherine's father. He was the loudest of their children, with powerful lungs and strong opinions about everything, and Katherine often joked that he had inherited her stubborn streak. Cooper was 39 now, with strands of gray appearing in his brown hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Katherine was 32, her hands permanently roughened from work but her eyes bright with contentment. They had built something real and lasting together, exactly as they had promised each other that night 6 years ago, one evening in the summer of 1892. As they sat on the porch watching their 3 children play in the yard, Katherine said, "You ever regret it?" "Giving up the cowboy life, settling down here?" Cooper looked at her in surprise. "Never, not once. Why would you ask that? I just wonder sometimes if you miss it. The freedom, the traveling, the lack of responsibility." "I don't miss being alone," Cooper said firmly. "I don't miss having nothing that mattered, nowhere that was home. What we have here, what we've built together, it's worth more than all the freedom in the world." He took her hand, his calloused thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You remember what I told you the day we met? That I was just passing through. I remember. Best decision I ever made was staying. Second best was asking you to marry me. Everything good in my life started the day I walked into that store in San Pedro and saw you behind the counter." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so lost back then, so afraid of ending up alone." "You'll never be left again," Cooper said, repeating the promise he had made her so many years ago. "I meant it then and I mean it now. We're together until the end, you and me." "Together until the end," Katherine agreed, squeezing his hand. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about Mr. Whitmore's letter, about his belief that he was setting her free by leaving her with nothing. In a way, he had been right. If he had left her the store, she would have stayed in San Pedro, tied to a struggling business and a town that held nothing but memories of loss. She would never have come to the Stevenson Ranch, never have met Cooper, never have built this life that was more than she had ever dared to dream. The general store in San Pedro had closed within a year of Charles Whitmore taking it over. Katherine had heard through Mrs. Patterson that Charles had returned to Boston after losing everything to debt and poor business decisions. She felt no satisfaction in his failure, only a distant sort of pity. He had wanted something he was not equipped to manage, and he had paid the price for his arrogance. But his failure had led to her success, in a roundabout way. Everything that had seemed like catastrophe at the time, Mr. Whitmore's death, being left with nothing, losing her job, had actually been the path to this life she loved. In 1894, when James was 9, Anna was 7, and Robert was 4, Cooper received a letter from his sister in Santa Fe. Their aunt had passed away and left Anna a small inheritance, and Anna wanted to share half of it with Cooper. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to make a significant difference in their lives. "We could buy more land," Cooper said, showing Katherine the letter, "or invest in better breeding stock, build a bigger house. Or we could save it," Katherine suggested, "for the children's futures. So they have opportunities we never had." They compromised, using part of the inheritance to buy 20 more acres adjacent to their property and saving the rest for the children's education. Cooper also used some of the money to buy Katherine a piano, something she had mentioned once in passing that she had loved to play as a child but had not touched in years. When the piano arrived from Los Angeles, carefully transported by wagon, Katherine cried. She sat down at the keys and played haltingly at first, her fingers remembering melodies she had thought long forgotten. The children gathered around to listen, and Cooper stood in the doorway watching his wife play with an expression of such love that it made Katherine's heart ache in the best possible way. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the cattle prices were low, when drought threatened their water supply, when illness swept through the herd or one of the children fell sick with fever. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the victories together. In 1896, they hired a tutor for the children, a young woman from San Pedro who rode out 3 times a week to provide lessons. James proved to be a natural scholar, devouring books and asking endless questions about everything. Anna was more artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Robert was adventurous and energetic, always getting into mischief and making his parents laugh with his antics. Cooper taught all 3 children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and by the time James was 12, he was helping his father with the cattle work in earnest. Anna preferred helping her mother with the garden and the household, though she could ride as well as either of her brothers when she chose to. Robert wanted to be a cowboy like his father, and Cooper spent patient hours teaching him about horses and cattle and the work of ranching. In 1898, when Katherine was 40 and Cooper was 47, they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had left the ranch for more than a day or 2 since starting the homestead, and they left the children in the care of their hands and Mrs. Stevenson, who had insisted she would love having them for a week. San Francisco was overwhelming after so many years in the country. The noise, the crowds, the tall buildings, all of it was almost too much. But they spent a wonderful week exploring the city, eating in restaurants, attending a play at the theater, and staying in a real hotel with running water and electric lights. "This is remarkable," Katherine said, standing at the window of their hotel room and looking out at the city lights. "But I can't wait to get home." "Neither can I," Cooper admitted, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Too many people, too much noise. Give me our quiet valley any day." They returned home to find the children healthy and happy, the ranch running smoothly, and everything exactly as they had left it. Katherine had never been so grateful to be home, to walk through her own door and sleep in her own bed with the sounds of the country night around her. The turn of the century came, a new millennium that felt momentous even in their quiet corner of California. James was 15 now, tall and serious and already showing signs of the man he would become. Anna was 13, beautiful and talented, with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. Robert was 10, all energy and enthusiasm, fearless to the point of giving his mother constant heart palpitations. "They're growing up too fast," Katherine said one evening, watching the 3 of them through the window. James was teaching Robert how to rope a post while Anna sat nearby sketching them. "They are," Cooper agreed. "Before we know it, they'll be starting their own lives, making their own ways in the world." "You think we've prepared them well enough?" Katherine worried. "Given them what they need?" "You're worrying for nothing." Cooper pulled her close. "Look at them. They're smart, capable, and they know they're loved. That's more than either of us had at their age. They're going to be just fine." In 1902, when James was 17 and preparing to leave for university in Los Angeles, Katherine and Cooper sat him down for a serious talk. "Your mother and I have been saving for this since you were born," Cooper said, handing James a bank book. "This is for your education. We want you to have opportunities to see more of the world than just this ranch." James looked at the numbers in the book and went pale. "This is thousands of dollars. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Katherine said firmly. "You've earned it, working hard all these years and being responsible and kind. Your father and I want this for you." "But the ranch," James protested. "Don't you need it for the ranch? The ranch is doing fine," Cooper assured him. "And your education is more important than any amount of money. Go learn, see the world, and then come back and teach us everything you've discovered." James left for Los Angeles in the fall, and the house felt strangely empty without him. But he wrote regularly, long letters full of enthusiasm about his classes and the city and everything he was learning. Anna missed her older brother terribly, but she threw herself into her art, and by the time she was 16, her drawings were good enough that Cooper and Katherine were discussing the possibility of art school for her as well. Robert, at 14, had no interest in university or art school. He wanted to work the ranch with his father, and Cooper could not have been more pleased. They spent long days together riding the property, checking on the cattle, and planning improvements. Robert had his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business, and Cooper began gradually turning over more responsibility to him. In 1905, James graduated from university with honors in business and agriculture. He returned to the ranch with new ideas about modern ranching techniques, and a young woman named Sarah on his arm. Sarah was the daughter of a Los Angeles merchant, educated and refined, and Katherine worried at first that she would find ranch life too rough. But Sarah proved to be made of sterner stuff than her delicate appearance suggested, and within months, she had adapted beautifully to ranch life and won over the entire family with her kindness and good humor. James and Sarah were married in the summer of 1906, with the ceremony held at the ranch under the oak trees where Cooper had first kissed Katherine 22 years earlier. It was a joyous celebration, with neighbors from miles around attending to wish the young couple well. Anna left for art school in San Francisco that same year, and though Katherine cried for days after seeing her daughter off on the train, she was proud of Anna's courage and talent. Anna wrote weekly letters full of descriptions of her classes and the city and the other students, and Katherine treasured every one. Robert, at 18, was now working the ranch full-time alongside his father. He had grown into a handsome young man, tall and strong with his father's quiet competence and his mother's warm heart. Cooper began talking about officially making him a partner in the ranch, and Katherine drew up the legal papers that would make it official. In 1908, James and Sarah announced they were expecting their first child. Katherine was going to be a grandmother, a fact that made her feel simultaneously old and overjoyed. The baby, a girl they named Eleanor, was born in the spring of 1909, and Katherine fell in love with her granddaughter the moment she held her. "This is what it's all about," Cooper said, watching Katherine rock baby Eleanor while James and Sarah looked on with tired but happy faces. "This is why we built all this. For them, for the generations to come." Anna returned from art school in 1910, her talent honed and her portfolio impressive. She announced her engagement to a fellow artist named Michael, a kind young man with gentle hands and a generous spirit. They were married in San Francisco, and Katherine and Cooper made the trip north to attend, bringing Robert and reveling in the sophistication of the city wedding while secretly longing for home. Robert met his future wife, Emily, in 1911 at a neighbor's barn dance. She was the daughter of a rancher from the next valley over, pretty and practical and perfect for Robert in every way. They courted properly for a year before Robert asked Cooper's permission to marry her, and the wedding was held at the ranch in 1912. By 1913, Cooper was 62, and Katherine was 55, and they had 3 grown children, all successfully launched into their own lives. James and Sarah lived on the ranch with them, running much of the daily operation with their 2 children, Eleanor and young James Jr. Anna and Michael lived in San Francisco, where both pursued their art careers and sent regular letters full of city news. Robert and Emily had built a house on the far corner of the ranch property, where they were raising their son Thomas and expecting a second child. The ranch had grown to over 400 acres, one of the most successful operations in the region. Cooper had turned over most of the daily management to James and Robert, though he still rode out every day to check on things and offer advice when asked. Katherine had gradually stepped back from the account books, teaching Sarah the system she had developed over the years and trusting her daughter-in-law to maintain them. One evening in the summer of 1913, Cooper and Katherine sat on the porch of their house, the same spot where they had sat so many evenings over the past 30 years, and watched the sun set over their land. "You remember the day we first saw this place?" Katherine asked, her hand in Cooper's. "How empty it was, just grass and trees and possibilities." "I remember thinking I'd never seen anything more beautiful," Cooper said. "Except for you," Katherine laughed. "You're still a charmer after all these years, only speaking the truth." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "We did all right, didn't we? The two of us." "We did better than all right," Katherine said softly, looking out at the thriving ranch, at the house where her son and his family slept, at the distant lights from Robert and Emily's house. "We built something lasting. Something good. Our children are happy and successful, our grandchildren are healthy and loved, and we did it all together." "Together," Cooper agreed. "Just like I promised you that night in San Pedro, you'd never be left again." "You kept your promise," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face though she was smiling. "You've kept it every single day for the past 29 years. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Two people who had found each other when both were lost and built a life beyond anything either had dreamed possible. Katherine thought about the young woman she had been, standing in the lawyer's office holding a letter that had seemed like the end of everything. She thought about the grief and fear and uncertainty, and how it had all led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. Mr. Whitmore had been wrong about one thing. He had written that he could not give her freedom, but he had. Not the freedom he had imagined, not the freedom to wander or search for something better. He had given her the freedom to find this, to build this, to choose this life with Cooper and never look back. She had been left with nothing but goodbye, standing in that dusty street in San Pedro with $43 and no future. And Cooper had said, without words at first, but then with every action of the years that followed, that she would never be left again. And he had meant it. God, how he had meant it. In 1914, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All three of their children came with their families, and neighbors from throughout the region attended to honor the couple who had built such a successful operation from nothing. Mrs. Stevenson, now elderly but still sharp, gave a tearful speech about how she had known from the beginning that Cooper and Katherine were meant to be together. "I've never seen two people more suited to each other," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "And I've never been happier to be proven right about anything." As Katherine danced with Cooper that evening, his arms strong around her and his eyes warm with love, she felt the same way she had felt on their wedding day. Blessed beyond measure, grateful beyond words, and certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, bringing new grandchildren and new challenges and new joys. Anna and Michael had two daughters who inherited their parents' artistic talents. James and Sarah had 4 children total, a mix of boys and girls who brought chaos and laughter to the main house. Robert and Emily had 3 sons, all of them born ranchers who could ride before they could properly walk. Cooper's hair turned completely gray, then white, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. Katherine's hands ached with arthritis on cold mornings, and her eyes required spectacles for close work. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family, still deeply in love after decades of marriage. In 1920, on a cool October evening, Cooper and Katherine stood at the overlook where he had first told her he was falling in love with her nearly 40 years earlier. They had taken to walking up here once a month, weather permitting, to look out at the land they had built together and remember the journey that had brought them here. 38 years, Katherine said, leaning against Cooper's shoulder. Where did they go? Into building this, Cooper said, gesturing at the ranch spread out below them, at the houses with their glowing windows, at the barns and corrals and the cattle dotting the fields. Into raising our children and loving each other and making every day count. I wouldn't change a single thing, Katherine said firmly. Not one moment, not one choice, it's all been perfect. Even the hard parts, Cooper asked with a smile, especially the hard parts. They made us who we are. They made us appreciate this. She turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her arthritic hands. I love you, Cooper Sutton. I've loved you from the moment you walked into that store and looked at me like I mattered. You did matter, Cooper said, covering her hands with his. You still matter, you'll always matter. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. They kissed as the sun set, two old people who still felt young when they were together, who still saw each other as they had been when they first met. Lonely, hopeful, and searching for someone to build a life with. They walked slowly back down to the house as darkness fell, Cooper's arm around Katherine's waist and her head on his shoulder. Their son James was waiting on the porch, waving to let them know dinner was ready. Through the windows, they could see their grandchildren playing, their daughters-in-law setting the table, their life continuing and growing in ways that filled them with pride and joy. We did it, Katherine said softly as they approached the house. We really did it. We did, Cooper agreed. And we're not done yet. There's still more life to live, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together. Good, Katherine said, because I'm not ready to be done. Not with you, not with this life. I want every moment we have left. You'll get them, Cooper promised, kissing her forehead. Every single one. They went inside to join their family for dinner, to laugh and talk and share a meal in the house they had built, on the land they had claimed, with the people they had created. And as Katherine looked around the crowded table at all the faces she loved, she thought again about that letter from Mr. Whitmore, about his goodbye that had felt like abandonment. He had been wrong about so many things, but he had been right about one. She had found happiness. She had found love. She had found freedom in the best possible way, by choosing this life, this man, this family, and building something that would last long after she was gone. She had been left with nothing but goodbye, and the cowboy had promised she would never be left again. And in keeping that promise, in staying and building and loving her with everything he had, Cooper had given her everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dreamed possible. They lived out their days on that ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, their love story becoming family legend. And when the end finally came for both of them, many years later, they died within months of each other, unable to imagine life without their partner, their love, their heart. But that was still far in the future. For now, on this autumn evening in 1920, Cooper and Katherine Sutton sat at their table with their family around them, their hands intertwined beneath the tablecloth, their eyes meeting across the chaos with the same love that had sustained them for nearly 4 decades. They had been given nothing but goodbye, and they had turned it into forever. And that was the greatest triumph of all.